Okay, it's recording.
Do I wait for something or?
Now you can carry on.
Okay, thanks, Henny. Good morning. Welcome to the 8th and final, at least final for the moment, of this International Gold Series. And we've got quite a full program today. What we're going to do is Graham Gavine is going to speak first, and he's going to talk about an interesting area down towards the Free State Clarkstorp area of around the Wits Basin. We might have one or two questions there, but not a long session, because we're then going to go on to the broader sort of 8 sessions and what we've got out of all that. And we're going to hear very quickly from Dave Craw. Then we're going to hear from Julian Verncombe, Bill McKechnie, and they'll be addressing some of the big issues that we've sort of mentioned and tackled over and over again as the weeks have gone on. I've also asked Bjorn Vonderheiden to just say for a minute or two what some student projects he's going. Perhaps this is showing my ignorance, but he was the only person I could think of who's actually published on active gold places in Africa. There may be other people on here who have, but I just wasn't sure. So I asked Bjorn to talk about those. What we want to do is afterwards, meaning after today, carry on some of the momentum of what we've learned, what we've sort of promised ourselves we'll do, make sure we get our data stored, make sure we keep the dialogue going, and make sure we are as helpful as we can be for postgrads, younger people who are basically the ones who are going to take the South African mineral industry forward over the years to come. So they're just some of the sort of highlight areas. Graham Gavine will be well known to quite a few of you because he's worked on the Wits for many years. He worked with Henny at Hartbeesfontein for I think Henny said 10 years. Hartbeesfontein's one of the Clarkstorp mines, and he was with Anglo Vaal. And I know he's worked quite a lot around the Velcom area because he's given one talk on that in this series about 3 or 4 years ago. And so if you've got time, go back and listen to that one because it's an interesting one on the Wits, and particularly some of the mines there that look pretty good at a time, but sort of struggle to get up as new mines. Anyway, that's Graham Gavine. I'll hand over to you now, Graham, and thank you very much for sort of coming at the late moment and putting your hand up and offering your direct knowledge and observations from your time at the Wits.
Okay. No, thanks very much for that introduction, Neil. I don't know how Henny viewed this, but I did change the title of my talk to the Dreyerskuil member Enigma, gold mineralization in Diamictites. So let me start off here. Let me find that. Just the focus of the talk, I want to move. I don't want to make a very long presentation. Just to run through some of the points that I want to make, particularly to outline some of the features for people who are not familiar with the Wits at all. So start off with the classic Vol Reef, which we always assumed was fluvial. Wits Basin, plan, stratigraphy, and overview of the boulder beds, the Dreyerskuil member, Diamictites, regional setting, projects that I've worked on, and just try and get everyone's mind to appreciate what message that I'm trying to convey here. But for the people who are not familiar with South Africa and the Wits goldfields, this is a plan showing, broadly speaking, where the goldfields are situated. And I'll just start briefly here. Vanda in the far east, South Rand, where Burnstone is, the Central Rand, coming all the way down through the West Rand, Carltonville, Clarkstorp, and then the Free State goldfields. Yeah, in the past 20-odd years, there's been the discovery of the Colesberg Basin as well as the Bethium Basin. So my talk today will be focusing immediately north of the Free State goldfields. Just to also introduce, broadly speaking, the stratigraphic column of the Central Rand group, which is the last sort of major phase of the Wits supergroup. And the area we'll be concentrating on is in Central Rand terms, the Mondial. This is where you get the EA's reefs, which form the basis of Target Mine, and were mined at Lorraine, as well as the 8 Cape member, the boulder beds. So this is broadly speaking, the focus is up right at the top here, below the Ventersdorp contact reef. But for Henny should recognize this. This is a sample I took out of 5 shaft, I think it was in 1980. Classic Wits plastic conglomerate, as we thought about it in the time. It was regarded as sedimentary. The gold was sedimentary in origin. You've got quartz pebbles, you've minimal pyrite here, and then you've got the carbon seam, pyrobitumen seam on the base of the reef. And as Henny will recall, all the gold is sitting, in this case, on the bottom contact there. The thickness of the reef is in the order of about 15 centimeters. And during the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of work done on the sedimentology of these reefs. There were a great number of theses were submitted, as well as there was a lot of sedimentological work and papers published. And just one of the comments, something with my research now, there was always this link between, you had carbon, there was always the implication that you had better gold content. And then the other thing that made mining easy, this is a sheet placer, lateral continuity and grade continuity over fairly large areas allowed for very high levels of extraction. And that was a feature of all the mines in the Klerksdorp area, which were mining the Vaal Reef. Okay, let's move on here. I'm going to start off my talk. We're looking at 2 boreholes that were drilled during the early days of the Welkom Goldfield. BD1 here on Western Holdings, and then WN5 that was drilled on what became the Greater Lorraine gold mine lease area, also back in the 50s. So, okay, just to outline what this particular rock type looks like, this is an image from Neil Phillips and Jonathan Law's paper in the 2005 Econ Geology anniversary volume. And the description I got was from a paper or a memo that was put out in the late 90s on the Target project. I think you can see, don't worry about the centimeter scale here, whether it's at this centimeter scale or whether it's at the cobble stage. We're looking at basically the same sort of pebble assemblage. So again, the description went chaotic class assemblage, angular to subangular class, no sorting, pebble assemblage, shale, rhyolite, quartzite, vein quartz, chert, and greenstone lithologies, pyrite, no carbon or pyrobitumen, and visible gold frequently observed in drill core. And as you can see, if even just looking at that Vaal Reef intersection, they are opposite ends of, let's just say, the reef package. So, okay. BD1 drilled far south of the area I'm going to be looking at. If you look up here on the top left-hand corner, the base of the Klipperfriesberg is indicated there. And from there down to there, it's an order of 495 meters. You've got a package of basically diamictites. You can see that that assemblage is probably 98% diamictites. And when I say that, in your mind, you must think of the previous slide. That's what the sequence indicates for us. Let me move to the next one now. This is WN5. As I say, I should have mentioned, these logs were from a package that I got on a Geo Congress back in '84, and I kept all these logs. So here on the top left-hand corner, got Dreyerskuil member, 8 Cape member. I'm going to use those 2 terms sort of probably interchange them. So here we've had a major change. There's the base of the Klipperfiesberg volcanics. There's your first interval of diamictites. There's a quartzite intercalation, and then there's your final package of diamictites. And as I just did a quick check, that's about 75 meters. So that total package here has been reduced to from 500 odd meters down to 75. From there downwards, you've got what is now developed as the EA reefs. This package of stacked reefs, basically classic oligomictic reefs, conglomerates, intercalated with quartzites and rock type we call quartz wackies. So there's been a major change from the south, from BD1 up to WN5, a distance of some 25 kilometers. There's been a major change on the western margin there. So to follow up, as you can see the symbol for conglomerates, you've got this package here of just stacked conglomerates. The basis of the EAs is sitting there. Now, below that, there's been, again, an enormous change. You're broadly dealing with probably 98% quartzites, and this continues down here, where this package here represents the base of that, what we call the ED zone. So from there downwards, we've got EB, EC, and ED zones, and then the base, the VS5 reef, and that goes into the Kimberley series there, the Kimberley member. And then just to point out as well, the total thickness of this package is in the order of 500 meters. So you're looking at a fairly consistent thickness of stratigraphic thickness as you move northwards. All right, let me get the next one up. Now, this is a fairly complex slide that I've put together. The basics, I've just picked up the pertinent part that is essential for my talk now. It's a paper from Henk de la Rey-Winter in 1995. I think it was a volume devoted to the VCR. And he had, over a couple of years, put together this lithostratigraphic facies diagram of the Free State goldfields. This is basically north-south. This blue line here indicates where BD1 is in terms of the stratigraphy. And just to remind you there, we've got the thickness of Dreyerskuil. Now, as you move northwards, you can see there's this intercalation of boulder beds, diamictites, and what progressively becomes the major package of the EB, EC, and ED reefs. Sorry, not reefs, quartzites. There sits the VS5. And then you can see as you're getting further north up to Lorraine, the diamictites are thinning out. You're getting the EA quartzites, quartz wax, and then you're starting to get all these reefs, the stacked reefs, that form the basis of target mine, and which were mined extensively on Lorraine over a strike length of about 20 kilometers, 15, 20 kilometers. Now, at this point, the 8 member and the transition to the Dreyerskuil member is not well defined. I really don't have much information of that. But at this interval, as I say, I don't have thicknesses. I've just taken data that I've got and established this broad stratigraphic zone. It's not to scale. I don't have thicknesses. But broadly speaking, just coming up, if there's an unconformity at the base of the DK ones, it does erode down into the underlying EA reefs. So you've got polymictic diamictites there, DK1, the same as the DK3. There is this DK2 quartzite band, but is not persistent. We move up, we've got the DK4s, essentially a quartzite with classic oligomictic conglomerates. We then move into the DK5s, which for what I've looked at is predominantly shale and quartzite. Then we move up into the DK6 polymictic conglomerate. Now that is a small pebble, coarse pebble conglomerate, also polymictic. We then move up into the DK7s, which is predominantly quartzites with a couple of these oligomictic quartz pebble reefs. And then the final phase here is again diamictite, polymictic diamictite, the DK89s. There is some complexity in the changeover from 89s, but just for a sort of a quick overview, I've just combined them and say 89s polymictic diamictites. To the left of the column here, these red lines indicate the zones where there's gold mineralization present. And I think you can see that there are in this Dreyerskuil member stack, you've now got significant wide zones of gold mineralization. As I say, this is also remembered from memory because I don't have obviously the data, the sampling results and putting together all the sampling and assay analytical data. So just to put this in context in a sort of a regional perspective. Unfortunately, this is from Charles Kingsley. He was an Anglo geologist who did quite a lot of sedimentological work. Fortunately, he's made this sort of a south-north section looking north. I'm not sure of why he did this. He's indicated here that there's in the Welkom area, i.e. Western Holdings, St. Helena mine, that is the 8 Cape member sitting there. Must be about 150, 200 meters. He's put a division here where he says this is now the EA zone, Welkom facies. I don't know on what basis he makes that. It wasn't clear on that log that I've got of BD1. And he calls this basically, this is a typical section for the Welkom area, i.e. Western Holdings. Now, as you move up northwards, from here, 20-25 kilometers, this is the basic stratigraphy as I've outlined, but a little bit more detail. You've got the polymictic boulder beds, polymictic diamictic boulder beds there. And here is sort of just detail, broadly speaking, the reefs that are present in the EAs. And then you go down into the, EBs, and then the EC, there's a placer there. And then you move down into the EDs, and then again, that marker, the VS5 reef. And one of the interesting issues is for Lorraine Gold Mine, while they were drilling out as part of the development, they would drill, obviously, to establish where the EA reefs were from the footwall. But literally, once they got into the boulder beds, they would stop drilling. So the boulder beds, the polymictic diamictite, were never looked at on Lorraine as a potential resource, which is actually in a way quite sad, but that was the thinking at the time. Again, this just indicates sort of how Charles Kingsley saw this lot. Again, the south-north section looking north. He's put in the 8 Cape member, polymictic diamictite. Then he shows the change from what he calls the Welkom facies, just the polymictic diamictites, showing the transition as you move further north into the oligomictic, he calls it gravels, quartz, arenites, reefs. The interesting part here is, I don't know what basis he delineated this anticlinal warp, and he says, significantly, the maximum interfering occurs above the anticlinal warp. As I say, I don't have any more information about that. And just to sort of reinforce this change up the western margin, okay, this fortunately is a north-south section looking east. This is basically southern Lorraine, probably a couple of kilometers south of WN1, and the thickness of the EAs here is in the order of 75 meters. And as we map or trace the succession northwards, there's an increase in the thickness of the EAs. up to the point here where in the north, probably in the area of 1C shaft, you've now got 150 meters of the EA sequence here. So as I recall from my work down there, as the EAs open up in thickness, there's a concomitant decrease in thickness of the polymictic diamictites of the sort of 8-cake formation transitioning through to the Dreyerskuil member. And the distance here is indicated by the guys who compiled this. This is about 5 kilometers apart. This is about 6 kilometers. So there is a very noticeable transgression from the 100% sequence of polymictic diamictites as indicated in Boyle BD1 as we move further north. So as I say, what I recall is as you move further north, the Dreyerskuil member is starting to appear, but the thickness I'm not sure of, but it is recognized that as you move north, the 8-cake member decreases in thickness. So, okay, let's move on. Just to point that out, on the Lorraine side, there is basically 8-cake member, and there the EAs, the EB footwall, the ECs, the EDs, and then sitting down here, you've got the VS5. Okay, for the next section, we're going to be looking further north, and all the plans and sections here are sourced from Angloval quarterly reports, Avgol quarterly reports from back in the 90s. In the 90s, Angloval picked up a lot of ground immediately north of Allen Ridge. Allen Ridge is about 30 k's north of Welkom. This eventually became the target mine, which was developed off the Lorraine infrastructure. And then in Sun, they held a huge block of ground here, and there was extensive drilling in this area, and I'll indicate that now. As I said, Angloval did a lot of drilling, and this is a plan dated from October 98. Lorraine is to the south here. This indicates the initial development for target mine. The discovery ball there is ER01, which was a prime intersection in the EA fan, which now the EA reefs form the basis of target mine. As you can see here, there's been a lot of drilling over several phases, and it was in the early 90s as part of target. DKL3 was drilled, and this is in fact the discovery borehole for the Dreyerskuil, where they realized from some of the reefs that there was actually gold mineralization that apparently was visible, and this changed the whole thinking. As I said, you can see that this area has been extensively drilled, and transition in the north there goes up into the Sun project area. And for just looking at the Dreyerskuil, I'm going to be taking the talk up into this area here. And I will mention DKL8 because there's something interesting going on there. There are, again, changes with the Dreyerskuil as you move further north, but I'm not going to touch that because I don't have much detail there. Now, actually, let me just go back one. The critical section is this one here, A plus. It shows, broadly speaking, west, east, looking north. You've got, they've indicated Dreyerskuil 3. If you look down here, these were intersections that are reported for just to give an indication of what's going on. So here you go, you've moved from the Dreyerskuil 1 to 3 package. You enter the Dreyerskuil 4, now, which is that sequence of quartzites with these bands of oligomictic conglomerates, mainly quartz pebble. Now, what is interesting here, and you can see there are some interesting values here, and these are just selected intersections. But in this area, and this is a feature here, the DK67 start appearing. You can see that these do extend in some thickness, and overlying the DK 6s, what is just being called the DK9s, but there is some subcropping relationships here, transgression, regression. So this just indicates the sort of values that were recorded during the drilling there. Okay, let's move on. This is a very busy slide. From that decline that was put down as a starting phase of target, they developed crosscuts, and there was intensive drilling to just give them more confidence on what EAs comprised. So unfortunately, this is the major focus of this section has always been the EAs. I think if people want to look at this, maybe go back once this is on YouTube and have a look. So here you've got the full sequence of EAs. You've got EBs down there, fairly steeply dipping. To the east here, you've got a structural feature which starts down on Lorraine, which is called the El Dorado Fault, and here we called it the Twin Fault. Now the EAs stop there. Here are the first intersections going into what is indicated here, the Dreyerskuil 1 to 3s. And you can see there are some fairly significant gold values along the base of this DK 1 to 3s. Now at this stage, just been indicated here, this is DK 6 to 9s. The understanding of the appearance of the 6 to 7s only started being understood as more drilling was done, and then with the work I did with a former Angloval Avgold colleague, when we were actually able to develop the Dreyerskuil stratigraphy in more detail. So just to remind you what the Dreyerskuil diamictite looks like, and we'll move on there. Now this indicates quite a lot. I think just ignore the EA information here. The base of the Dreyerskuil is indicated here, and they've said delineated two zones, the DK1B to DK1A. Further DK3s. Now what these two zones here, we've gone into the DK4s, predominantly quartzites. And now we've got the DK49 bottom reef, the DK4 top reef, and these are just again selected cuts. So you've got the opening up of the DK series or DK4 member, and you've got this increasing width of the DK4s, but very little detail on the 6 to 9s. In fact, they just call it the 6 to 9s, and that there is probably the base of the DK8s, if not the DK9s. So as I say, there are some interesting stratigraphic and sedimentological relationships here. And we look further down here to the west, there are, again, intersections have been recorded on the base of probably the DK8s. Okay, let's just move on. The DK L8, it was a borehole drilled, was fairly close to the sun target boundary. It intersected the full Dreyerskuil member. There was no pyrite, but instead the sulfide was pyrrhotite, which I've never been able, well, people I was dealing with, and I can't explain that situation. And there was very little gold present, only in the DK9 unit, basically the top of the sequence. So let's just move on. I've tried to put a coherent sort of thoughts behind this lot. The setting of gold mineralization in the polymimetic diamictites, diametrically opposite to the classic placer model prevailing at the time. The mineralization has actually got nothing in common with a typical quartz pebble reef or pyrite, gold, and carbon, which was long accepted for reefs like the Vaal Reef. We realized very quickly as we got to drill more boreholes through the Dreyerskuil that this mineralization had to be hydrothermal. And this included also the typical quartz pebble type conglomerates developed in the DK4s. It was simple because the mineralization in these DK4 quartz pebble conglomerates, the mineralization extended over great thicknesses, where if you go back to my Vol Reef sample there, the gold is concentrated on the bottom contact, which I think this, is an interesting development that hopefully does support the hydrothermal model. Let's move on there. And just the implications, and I try to put something coherent here. Can the Dreyerskuil reefs as well as the EA reefs mineralization be related to the proposed hydrothermal model? The structural setting plus the subgrouping relationships between the mineralization can be related. Hopefully the sections I presented have indicated that situation. And then we also have, and I'll show the detail, the eastward facing thrusts that have been delineated right through the EA, EB, EC, and ED zones. And hopefully these were the pathways for the movement of the hydrothermal fluid. Now, Neil should recognize these diagrams because they're from his 2005 paper in Econ Geology 100th anniversary volume. From my knowledge of the area around Target and some of the work that I've been able to access on Lorraine, these basinward facing thrusts are a feature of the west limb, i.e., well, some people call it the syncline. Modern or the later geologists describe it as a monocline. And this is the water, carbon dioxide, gold, and H2S fluid pathways were through these thrusts. And I also wonder if there was any pathway through what I call there the twin fault, which in that one section was immediately east of that intensive zone of drilling from the underground platforms. And then, of course, the ore bodies and subcropping marginal unconformities, very much a feature of the EAs as well as the Dreyerskuil member in that area. I've just repeated my comments from before because I want to hopefully try and bring these features and these facts together. Now, from some of the work papers that I've read that have been published, deformation along the basal part of some of these reef zones. You have these thrusts, and this from a company report that I fortunately found that I had a copy of. The first time that this type of basal thrust faulting near the bottom of these reef zones was documented and recorded. It was a very comprehensive report put in by a guy called Steve Jolly, and he put together a very comprehensive report on how he interprets the structure along that basin margin monocline syncline feature that is part of the geology there. This to me is the typical section through the Lorraine geology. It is very complex. The pertinent features here are these basin inwards facing thrust faults, which displace the stratigraphy. Here you got the boulder beds, EAs. This I would interpret from there down to there, the EB, EC, EDs. Then you got the VS5 reefs. You've got movement away from the basin margin to the east. And this here was probably an original thrust fault, which has now been reactivated as a normal fault. And this is the El Dorado fault further south, i.e. probably the southern extension of the twin fault. And there is a wrenching phase that has been recognized. And I think Russell Myers published a paper or presented a talk on how he saw the Lorraine structure. And I mean, I think that's going back 35 odd years. Now, again, Neil should recognize a diagram from his 2005 paper, mapping on the Kimberley Reef on the Kinross gold mine. And again, just for comparison, I've taken that diagram from Lorraine report. And again, you see similar features there. This is 5 meters width, and in this diagram, that is in the order of 5 meters. So hopefully I'm drawing together features that have been recognized in other gold fields that are, I would assume, that are present here, but were never actually recorded by the mine geologist, because production is the focus. So just in conclusion now, I wanted to outline the setting of gold mineralization hosted primarily by the polymitic diamictites. The Dreyerskuil member represents the northern facies of the boulder bed's 8-cake member. The stratigraphic section that I presented there is modified to show the change in facies from BD1 to WN5. And the very basic section that I've put together just to indicate what the Dreyerskuil member looks like as you move north from Lorraine. And the sections just detail selected cuts. I think I'm drawing inference that we can assume that the required structural setting plus the subcrop transgression regression stratigraphic relationship support the hydrothermal model. And I think just from the mindset back in the 50s, it can be accepted that the boulder beds were not routinely sampled. Whether there's data in the Anglo-American records that are now held by Harmony, I don't know. As a consequence, there's a critical paucity of data to understand the 8-cake member and the facies change up the west margin to the north of target mine. As I say, there are major changes in the structure. It's not part of this presentation to detail that, but the structure on the west margin there, the monocline, is complex, as I indicate here. And this is a theme that I've made several times in comments on LinkedIn, that the western margin of the goldfield, where Welcome Goldfields holds the key to fully understand the terminal phases of the Central Rand group. Again, a comment that I've made, we need more research done in this area. Okay, that's hopefully, well, that is the end. Hopefully I haven't
That's great, Graham.
overspent my time there. I'm sure there's
That's good. Look, what I'll do is we have used quite a bit of time, but that was fine. I won't have questions right now. We'll let people either take them right at the end, but we'll go on to Dave Core in just a minute, and people obviously can contact you by email and that afterwards as well. So look, thank you very much for that, putting it together, and it's lovely to hear from people who have actually worked on exploration and underground in these mines. I'm going to, there are quite a few questions on what we should do with this data, but don't lose them. We need to talk about what happens in the next few weeks and how we capture this. I'm going to change at this moment and ask Dave Core if he could just speak for 2 or 3 minutes, partly because he said some very important things the very first meeting we had, and I think it's important to come back to those and let him sort of explain them a bit now he's heard the last 7 sessions after him. Dave, all yours.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I don't want to talk very long because Graham has just basically given my talk here. But I'm an outsider, and so I'm looking from the Cenozoic back to what you guys know well and I don't. But my principal observations is that the gold concentrations, they're strata-bound, but they're not necessarily sedimentary. So I'm not a great believer in the placer concept. And Graham has just addressed that quite nicely, I think. And to go with that, my second point there is that what I've seen of pictures, and I've actually been underground, the gold conglomerates in the Wits, they don't look anything at all like any known Cenozoic placer. They just do not have the same features as the Cenozoic placers that we know well. So as far as I can tell, the only people who think that the Wits is a placer are Wits people. And it's something that I don't understand, and I leave that to you to sort out. And one way to do that, Neil said that he wants to know about where we should go next. So at the bottom, I've just put some ideas. Should we be looking more at process-oriented comparisons between the Cenozoic, where I live, and the Wits in the Archean? I think there's something to be learnt there. Spike the other day was talking about braided rivers and channels and things like that, and we've got lots of those, of course, in active tectonics in the Cenozoic. One of the things about braided rivers, in my experience, is that they don't concentrate gold. So I hear quite a lot about braided rivers when people are talking about the Wits. But if you look at a real braided river in an area with gold, you'll very rarely find any gold concentration. And that leads on to my second one there at the bottom. Looking at Circum-Pacific Cenozoic placer gold, there's an awful lot of it. There's nowhere near as much gold, of course, as there is in the Wits, or there has been. But nevertheless, there's a lot of examples in a very wide range of geological situations with unconformities and channels. And we can look at the gold without being taken to greenschist facies. We can look at the gold compositions and so forth. So I think more comparison between real placers, if you'll pardon me being arrogant, and your guessed placers. I think that needs to be done. And then I would go a step further and join Graham with his talk and say we should be looking more at gold mobility in metasedimentary mountains. You've got the roots of an Archean metasedimentary mountain belt. We've got the tops. They're happening now. And in that situation, we've got hydrothermal systems that are going on in modern mountains that have lithological control, they got structural control, they got chemical processes, and something that's dear to my heart is the carbon. So there's a whole lot of things that we can look at in the world of fairly active mountains that I think feed back to the sorts of things that you know and love within your mountain roots. So that's me, really. Go for it, Neil.
Dave, thank you very much for that. I should have actually introduced you for the few who missed earlier, but Dave's based in Dunedin and South Island, New Zealand. So he's done an awful lot of work, and that's where he draws a lot of this modern from. And I guess when you're talking around the Pacific, you're talking about Californias and Alaskas and Siberia, New Zealand, of course.
Yeah, and I'll throw in Victoria for you if you like, Neil.
Yeah, a little bit older, but that's okay.
It's Circum-Pacific, and it's got some very nice placers.
Yep. I just explore. I've got one question, and it was from Andy Clay pointing out that Mile had done quite a lot of work with analogues, and I think that's on things that you've seen yourself, Dave, and that was the big rivers in Saskatchewan, the Platte and the Donjac. Are those ones you're familiar with as far as analogues go?
Well, yeah, I've been there, but they don't have much gold in them. That's why I would say stick with New Zealand, where we've got a source of gold that's really young, and we've got mountains and we've got braided rivers coming out of them.
Okay, so the Canadian ones are a good match sedimentary-wise, but are not gold-bearing. They're sort of not concentrating gold, they're diluting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
One of the things that I fussed about in my talk is the relationship between gold and black sand. And I think the rivers you mentioned the Saskatchewan and so forth, they don't even concentrate black sand very well. So even if they had gold, I don't think it would concentrate.
Yeah, okay. Highlighting your point. Yep. Yeah.
Neil, can I come in just on a point with the carbon?
Yep.
One of the things that went on during the last couple of presentations is the belief that many people have that the carbon is an algal mat and therefore some kind of has the ability to actually concentrate the gold. That is not an algal mat. That is oil. It's mesophase. We've proved that. And the point is we need to understand how it migrated from the source rock to where it is today, which I don't think we clearly understand. And that's my point.
I think that's a really important point coming from Keith, because it's fine and well coming up with these algal mats and all that stuff, but I mean, we have to move past that. These are metamorphic rocks, and as Keith said, they're not in the oil window anymore. They're about 300 or 400 degrees, so they're even hotter than anthracite. So I just think, yeah, it's time to move on. These algal
Yeah,
mat
can
type
I
things.
just add to that? I agree 100%. You call it oil, Keith. In my world, it's graphite. We get hydrothermal graphite in the active mountain system.
In our case, I refer you to paper. It's a publication, I think, we did in about 1999. We did it in conjunction with oil industry experts, where we actually did reflectivity measurements with a microscope, lots of them across the Wits Basin. And it clearly came out that this is mesophase. It is actually optically bireflecting. So we can actually do that kind of work with it. So we can measure the temperature of origin quite accurately.
I think that's your paper by Gray and
Yes.
FL, and there's the other one by John Parnell. Definitely worth reading before anyone talks about algal mats anymore. At least understand what these experts are saying. On that note, I'm going to thank Dave. I'm going to move to Julian Verncombe. Julian gave the second talk in our series on structural controls on gold in the Witwatersrand, and he's based in Perth at the moment. So, Julian, if you can, there you are, that's good.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
People hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'm assuming all can in that case. I just put some thoughts together about how things can be done differently. And let's face it, the real challenge is not another research paper. The real challenge is to make money and make a difference to the people of South Africa. And I've listened to a number of talks, and the first thing that I think we all have to observe is that somehow many of the people who've talked and or asked questions have been underground and somehow see different things underground. Now, this was a picture that I was only made aware of in the last couple of days, and I think its original source is Joubert's thesis. And I think that the red lines are actually meant to be carbon, which they recognize as being also faults. And we see VCR here, and presumably there's VCR here. And this is a small uplifting thrust. There is carbon on the contact, and along these carbon, there is major fractures. So there's different things that different people are seeing. And secondly, different observations. For instance, how many people have actually assayed here? How many people have actually assayed or described the material along that fault that's inside the Ventersdorp lava? And I think that these sorts of answers will be less than the fingers on your hand. Now, there's a big opportunity for South Africa, and it's in this. When I lived in South Africa, and then when I subsequently was running exploration to mining companies, gold was worth between about 20 was worth less than $20 an ounce. A gram, 20 a gram. And there was a comment in the chat about the gram price. The last 3 weeks, the gram price of gold has been over $100 US. And obviously there's just been this enormous post-COVID increase in the gold price, representing just the global dissatisfaction with governments and bureaucracies. But you know, that's a massive difference in the price that represents a real opportunity for you guys. I've got 3 slides on how different sections of the population should, in my opinion, do things differently. And the first thing that's needed desperately is the documentation of structural geology on each of the mines. Now, in South Africa, the same as the rest of the world, it's increasingly difficult to get underground, and by far the best candidates for that are going to be people who were mine employees, preferably your underground geologists. Any program needs to think geology, not databases. In other words, you've got to keep the geochemists at arm's length and make sure you're doing geology. The geology needs to be done at all scales. And there've been a couple of comments and certainly parts of presentations where we've been told something at one scale and it's dogmatically insisted on, but other scales are just dismissed. You've got to be doing your work from the micro view, at least thin section scale, to the scale of the basin, and you have to be doing all those things at the same time. You don't do one month and the other the next month. You do them all at the same time. The geophysics, I mean, we've not really had a show of any geophysics, despite the massive expenditure by Anglo-American and Gencor on seismic back, what, 30, 40 years ago. Somehow, and I've seen some of it, not all of it, I've just seen tiny little bits, and some of it is absolutely brilliant and has got brilliant textbook examples of things like domino faulting. What's needed is for somebody to put together those geological cross sections. So you need a trained geophysicist, but we need a structural geologist putting things together, and a desperate need to nurture lateral thinking students. Now, from a mining company perspective, are we going to continue to just mine that at 3 kilometers greater? It's very hot, it's very dangerous. Or can we change the target? What about mining the whole of this, you know, meters upon meters of a broader zone? I don't know of any contradictory data. People have said in talks that this is wrong, but this shows, yes, super high grade on a reef here, here, and here, but it also shows a substantial shoulder, and this drill hole an even more substantial shoulder. This is 80 meters of mineralization, and if you could mine the whole of it, you've got a completely different sort of operation. Now, when I said that in my talk, Graham did get back and say that I understand Harmony are actually doing something like that underground. So the implications of this about exploration differently, and this is for a company that's got $10 million in the bank and a company that can raise $100 million. And what would I suggest that those companies did? And if you're asking which nationalities dollars, it's that's the slop in the number. To begin with, one of the things will be to explore the ground where there is Witwatersrand within 500 meters of surface. So the obvious thing is that there's some social license issues there. But the place that is probable, and it's already going to be pinged, is where you've got Witwatersrand strata that are being mined sitting beneath tailings. I personally would go and peg the whole of the Shamvian. There's nothing in the tectonic models that tells me that it shouldn't be mineralized. And when I go underground at Shamva, it looks like the Witwatersrand. I also think that the Botswana needs to be revisited, because all that work that was done in Botswana was looking for stratigraphy, not structural positions that could be mineralized. You need to, I mean, this is obvious, but you need to employ structural geologists for most jobs, because most exploration is structural geology. And you obviously need angled drill holes, and confidentiality is not to be mentioned. And finally, what can, say, a senior geo, so this is someone who doesn't command that budget, they're a person, they're an employee in a company, but you need rogue hero type geos. We need people that are going to upset people. We need people that are going to do things differently, come up with wild ideas. We certainly need some honest mapping. We've just had a presentation where most of the maps look quite old. We need all intervals in every drill hole assayed, not just the bit you think is going to be mineralized. And above all, we need to analyze the raw data, the smoothing, the contouring, kriging, all those things that have enabled some sort of crude sedimentary interpretation need to be put to one side, and we work on raw data. And that's all I had to say, but this is a copy of a slide from Bill McKechnie, and it would be for him to talk to it.
Okay, let's hold it on that slide. I'll just say thank you to Julian very much. Do we have one or two quick questions before we move on to Bill? I don't think you've left any of us too unclear about what your message is, Julian. There's quite a few serious changes that are needed there, but I know where you're drawing a lot of that from, because that's how it's done in some successful groups around the world. So there's obvious things to learn from those places. I'll move on to Bill now, and there'll be a chance to come back and talk to any of the previous speakers, ask them questions afterwards. Bill, if you're on yet, Bill actually made a lot of comments about how we preserve data, and I asked him if he'd put together 2 or 3 minutes on that, because there's some do's and don'ts, but as much as anything, keep it right up there as a highlight and make sure we just don't move on 10 years and find we've done nothing. And as Bill so nicely said, none of us are getting any younger.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Can we get slide back up again, please? Is that possible? Have you got it there?
Yes, I just made the absolutely stupid mistake of clicking off and then losing it. I am trying to get you back.
Thanks, Julian. Okay, the words are pretty well self-explanatory. But, you know, if some of you guys consider yourself as outsiders, I'm a complete outsider. I'm not a gold guy. I just found this series of talks tremendously interesting. Obviously, for anyone knowing anything about South African geology, Wits gold has been very important. And this whole discussion around placer versus hydrothermal, I know it's been going on for years and years. That's what twigged my sort of interest. So Dave Crow said in an email that the arguments are best settled on outcrops, but we know these days getting to Wits outcrops is not so easy underground. So I thought, well, Julian has made the point that geology is very much an observational science. And really all the contributions that are made are through observations on outcrops, either field, underground, or whatever. Now, lots of the observations made in the past can no longer be made. So what do we have? We maybe have photographs. We've got people's individual observations, their ideas. They may have had different ideas at the time that were never presented fully for one reason or another, i.e. they couldn't go against the dogma or whatever. So there will be people out there that have these ideas and thoughts, and how do we find them, and how do we get those contributions to be able to add to the bucket of information that we have? I think Keith Kenyon's talk was a great illustration of data and information on the VITs that isn't generally available. And I made the point after his talk that we're all getting older. We have, drawers and maybe boxes full of information that, when we move on, what's going to happen to it? So, those of us that have an interest in this sort of thing really are obliged to try and do something about it, whether or not, it may not be published papers that we put together. And history tells us that most of us are not good at doing that, me included. But the personal notes, maps, photographs that you can make available, recollections about how things happened, methodologies that were used underground and in the field, all of that is important in interpreting things in the past. And we had Gavine give some indications of that in some of the discussions that we had as well. So what to do? I thought, well, individuals can categorize and catalog their information and ideas in the form of short notes. We really need some sort of repository. Maybe it's a VITS gold repository somewhere. Could it be local, international, whatever? I mean, there are lots of question marks about South Africa. However positive one is one way or another, if you understand managing databases, you need multiple copies held maybe in different places. And then for us as individuals, inform your family on what to do with your stuff when the worst happens, or else start preparing for it proactively. And maybe, this idea of having some sort of central VITS repository is a way to go. I don't have any thoughts or prejudices as to where it should be. I have question marks about the Council for Geosciences here in South Africa, but life changes. What we have today may not be what we have in 10 years' time, particularly if, as Julian said, we go beyond the research and start looking again at the economic possibilities around the VITs. And that's really all I have to say at the moment, but maybe I'd welcome any ideas on how we could take this forward.
That's really great. Thank you very much for the effort you put into sort of gathering up all those ideas. I think you make a good point on storage in our favourite universities and those type of things, because we've all seen how rapidly change of leadership in a department, a university decides it doesn't want geology anymore, so let's chuck out all the stuff on the VITs. It can happen so easily, and it's a one-way trip. So also your idea of multiple places or storages was a good one. Anyone want to add to what Bill said or ask him questions?
Can I come in there? Has anybody thought of using as another repository the South African Archive as a sort of repository where it's almost the ultimate repository where if any other place fails, this will probably more than likely continue going. Right up here in Cape Town, I'll try and contact them and see if you can do something like that. Put it in a real archive so it's properly looked after. Historical archive.
I think it was Bill who was talking about multiple places potentially, and
yeah, I agree with the multiple places. Just an additional, different one to the traditional ones. The other thing I want to add to is I've been thinking of getting my many field notebooks, hiring somebody and to type them out. I can't even read them, and just see if you can decipher them, because I think those things, I refer to them all the time, and I'm trying to work back as to what I originally did. They are very useful documents.
So there's a job if a young person wants to earn some money.
Maybe you can record them, Keith. Just talk to, just read the damn things into, into voice notes.
Yeah.
I've been faced with vast amounts of data on projects from companies. The one famous project had been held by 4 companies. They'd got all this data. They could put cardboard boxes on your desk. They could show you all the digital. But it was a mess. And we actually put the data to one side and went bush and discovered 1,000 things that weren't in the data, and bought the project, and it became Australia's largest tungsten resource. What my message is that large amounts of data are not really very useful unless somebody sorted it out. And the very least you need is a catalogue.
I'm not sure whether the chat is being seen by everyone or just me, but almost predictably, Bjorn van der Heijden has made a number of suggestions how modern technology could be used to transcribe the notes, store the information, so forth. So definitely he should be brought in as this discussion goes forward.
I was just going to say Bjorn was ominously quiet. I want to suggest that we need a champion. We can't just talk about it. We need somebody to actually start the process. Maybe find funding to get that person paid. But the best position is a guy like Bjorn who can use his slaves to start, collating this and drive it, and then contact the rest of us and find out who has information so that we know where the sources are. We say it must be done, but somebody needs to champion this.
So you're suggesting Bjorn's got nothing better to do, and he's
Exactly.
not fully employed.
Exactly. He's younger and he's
The poor guy's overworked. I'm going to shift to Bjorn if you're right there. And the reason for doing this, it's a little bit different, but he's actually been supervising and involved in and published on real gold placers in Africa. So I just wanted him to mention what he has been doing there without making this a long talk on the geology. So Bjorn, all yours.
Sure, thanks, thanks Neil, and Henny, thanks for trying to make me do more work. Look, I do agree. I think someone does need to champion it. I think for a university institution to access those cheap slaves, what we really need is a pool of funding that can support master's level students, and they would be a really good resource, I think, to utilize towards transcribing, reevaluating data sets, but at the same time, they should be afforded opportunities to get underground and see the geology. They can't just sit there and work with historical data. I think that's unfair on the students. So anyways, I just quickly put together a few slides. I didn't speak to much of this before, and I just sort of related back to some of the comments we've made, relate to the work that we've done on placers in Tanzania and what we believe in Kibali district and DRC. So this is the first one. I have shown these slides in my talk a few weeks ago. The gold that we found in the placer system had very fine and delicate features. They've got these sort of overgrowth rims.
Your slideshow is not up.
Is it not up? You're looking at me.
No, we're looking at your PowerPoint, but not at the slide itself.
Is it right?
There we go.
Is that working now?
No, it's still side by side. Now it's the one with your notes.
Good call, yeah. Let's see. These youngsters, they don't know how technology works.
Just pick the one with.
Yeah, I'll just do it in full screen mode like this. That's fine. It's fine. I think it'll work. Anyways, you can see now?
No, just go to slideshow and then start that.
Does it work? You know what happens?
You're on the wrong screen.
because I've got two screens here.
Yeah,
so
you're just sharing the wrong screen. Just pick the
yeah,
right one.
I just unplugged the big screen. Okay. So anyways, you should see
There we go.
the images now. Yeah, I was just speaking to these very delicate textures, which you wouldn't expect in a placer gold system, which should be quite nicely rounded, unless you're really, really proximal to source. We also saw spheroidal gold associated with organic matter and with clay minerals, and when we looked at them under the scanning electron microscope, you could see what we interpreted to be sort of rim overgrowths of secondary gold. But someone like Dave Kroll might explain that as sort of a mechanochemistry type artifact. The point we made in this publication was just that when we saw it in the sort of soil profiles, you could see the fluctuating redox conditions, so more reducing phases, more oxidizing phases as a function of the rainfall in this semi-tropical area. And we envisaged that as the redox system changed, you would see speciation differences in the ambient gold complexes. And we use that to explain these sort of secondary overgrowths and these very fine features. And how we relate this back to the Wits then in the sort of last paragraph in that paper is just, Archean atmospheres are predicted to be very different. We've just heard in the last talk that it was probably a lot colder if you're getting all these diamictite layers. And so what would have been the nature of the diagenetic processes that might have been operating on a sedimentary sequence if the model is accepted as being placer, which I'm not saying it is. So that was just the first thought. The second thought relates to some work by Jan Parker, who's just finished his PhD at the Kabali area. And what he noted there was that there was some, and there they do assaying on a meter interval. And they often come up with sort of mineralized segments that weren't expected to be mineralized. And this is often in these conglomeratic layers. It doesn't show the pervasive quartz carbonate sericite sulfide alteration often, so there's much lower degree of alteration. And he did an analysis of each of the gold grains, a very big data set at his disposal, but he showed that within the metaconglomerates, there was a much higher probability that the gold is associated with gangue silicate minerals, quartz pebbles, whatnot, versus the hydrothermal mineralization, which is the dominant style of mineralization, that area where it's dominantly associated with the sulfides. He saw a slightly larger grain size distribution in the gold. And he also saw some differences in the chemistry of the gold. So just in terms of the gold content, the silver content between the conglomeratic hosted gold proponents of mineralization versus this hydrothermal and banded iron formation hosted proponents of the gold mineralization. So just putting that all together, he inferred that potentially there was a precursor, a paleoplacer component to the system. And, to make a world-class deposit, we really need a variety of processes to overlap in the most the best possible way. So if you had a paleoplacer in your sedimentary package and then you overprint it with a hydrothermal system, the probability of forming a world-class deposit just goes up. And so those are basically the two take-home messages from the recent work that we're doing. And as I try to relate it to this type system, what is the role of diagenetic processes, if any? And I guess we could include that to sort of oil mobilization if that's a model from Fuchs and something we're thinking about on this side as well. And then this idea that, if there's a lot of gold in the system, if you've got a gold-rich source region, Archean rocks, Archean greenstone belts, if I think about Barberton, I know the ages don't match up nicely. But they would be that much more prospective for any subsequent hydrothermal overprints to give rise to a world-class deposit. Thank you. Sorry, a little bit tangential, but maybe cool.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Bjorn. I should point out to other people that I think you had about 26 minutes notice to get all this together, so you've done incredibly well. And I also just wanted to highlight that we have got some studies on real modern places in Africa, so a bit of know-how there. I'm going to Any questions for Bjorn, first of all? If not, what I'm going to do is a little bit of the formal side and thank a number of people for this series. We can come back and have further discussions after that, but I know some people probably need to or want to sign off. Special thanks to all the speakers, the people who've contributed over the weeks. Takes time and effort to put those talks together, and thanks very much. Behind the scene, there's been, and sort of hardly behind the scene, but John Bristow and Henny Grief, who have really sort of driven the whole lot from Hermanus and southern part of Africa. Nolene Pauls is there and putting together the YouTubes that you see from sort of each Monday onwards. And I might point out that I understand Nolene's about to take over as president of the GSSA in July from Steve McCourt, who's on some of these. So to both of those, congratulations. And there's a number of other helpers who have rescued us at critical moments, like Bruce Cairncross and Grant Cawthorne. And the other thing too, of course, great organisation you've got there is the Overberg Geological Group. Melbourne University's sort of chipped in here, and particularly Melanie Finch, leader of the Geology Gold Course, and of course a whole number of colleagues at universities, Stellenbosch. I can think of about half a dozen who have given talks and made comments, so thank you very much for coming along there. I suppose the last thing to say is we do need to keep things going, or we do want to keep things going. There'll be people actively researching, finishing our papers, our studies, going away and thinking about this. Others who don't want to, that's fine. But feel free to join in. And if you want to join in and say who's talking about this or that next week informally, then John or Henny are probably the best people if you want to get contacts. But we're already got about a dozen people chatting about things this afternoon and yesterday, so it's not a closed shop. It's going to work much better if other people feel welcome to listen, feel welcome to contribute. I might leave it there and say I've had a lot of fun, and thank you very much for joining in, and I hope we can do this a little bit later on in this year or next year.